Hey, what's up everyone? How's it going? This is Waj over here, and in this video we're doing a head-to-head showdown between two of the thinnest and lightest smartphones you can get in the marketplace. I'm talking about the Apple iPhone 6 and the Oppo R5. We're going to be taking a look at the strengths and weaknesses of each of the devices and see how they stack up against each other in terms of all things considered. So if you're interested in that, let's get right into this comparison. Now, there's a couple of unique factors about the Oppo R5 that makes it stand out from the herd of Android devices you can get out there. And we'll certainly get into some of those unique factors, but really its biggest claim to fame is its overall thickness. It's currently right now one of the thinnest smartphones ever made. And back when the iPhone 6 came out a couple of months ago, I was super impressed of how thin and light that phone was. But as you can see side by side, there's actually an incredible difference between these two smartphones. The R5 only impressively measures about 4.85 millimeters, but surprisingly, it is a little bit heavier than the iPhone 6, measuring about 155 grams, versus the iPhone 6 measuring about 129 grams. Now, funny enough, don't let the thickness deceive you, because both of these devices have a protruding rear-facing camera. We have a slightly protruding camera on the iPhone 6, which some people really complain about, but it's nothing compared to the camera that's on the Oppo R5, which sticks out like a sore thumb and really takes away from the streamlined, slim look that the R5 is trying to maintain. Now, in terms of the footprint and dimensions, you'll notice that the Oppo R5 is certainly a much larger phone than the iPhone 6, measuring about 148.9 millimeters in terms of its height, 74.5 millimeters in terms of its width, versus the iPhone 6 is a pretty small, measuring only about 138.1 millimeters in terms of height and about 67 millimeters in terms of its width. Now, in terms of build material, they're both really premium devices. I'm really impressed of how Oppo can maintain such a low asking price considering the quality of their phones. If you take a look at the back, it has a nice metal back, which definitely feels very premium, and it has a nice metal band all around the phone itself. Now, the iPhone has also full aluminum construction, and the chassis is very solid, very nicely built overall phone, up to what you would expect from Apple. But in terms of the ergonomics, I do have to say that the Oppo R5 is not as comfortable to hold in the hand compared to the iPhone, which has nice subtle rounded corners all around the phone, which definitely makes this phone really nice to use and very comfortable in the hand, versus the Oppo R5 is certainly a thin block. Now, it doesn't really have any sharp corners, but they are more drastically squared off, making the phone not as pleasant and comfortable in the hand compared to the iPhone. Now, as mentioned previously, both cameras are protruding at the back of these devices, so when using both devices on a flat surface, you will notice a little bit of a wobble going around in all four corners, and the uneven wobble effect is much more accentuated on the R5 because that camera protrudes out a lot more than what we see on the iPhone 6. Now, the real crazy thing about the Oppo R5 is that it's so thin that you can't even fit a normal size 1/8-inch headphone jack. You need a special adapter that comes with the phone that basically goes from a USB connection to an 1/8-inch connection, so you can put in any kind of headphones. And at first I thought that'd be really kind of inconvenient, but once you put on your headphones and attach it to the actual adapter itself, it becomes just an extension of the cable itself. So it's not really a huge deal, but some might find that to be a little bit of a hassle. Now, one thing I should mention about the Oppo is that it does have a fairly large border that goes all around the display between the screen and the bezel itself, which is definitely annoying if you have the white version. As you can see, the black border definitely kind of detracts from the overall sleek look of the phone. I'd love to see the screen right against the bezel itself like you see in most traditional smartphones, but unfortunately that's not the case on this ultra thin Oppo. Now, moving forward, let's talk about the displays that comes on these two devices. And when we're taking a look at the overall resolution, we do find that the Oppo R5 has the better overall screen. It has a full 1080p screen that has a PPI count of about 423, and the iPhone 6 has a resolution of 1334 by 750, which has a PPI count of something around 326. And in terms of screen size difference, you're looking at 4.7 inches on the iPhone 6 and about 5.2 inches on the Oppo R5. And we have a much better screen technology on the Oppo R5. It's using AMOLED, which is organic LED based technology, and even though they can replicate the same number of 16 million colors, overall the brightness and the black levels on the AMOLED display on the Oppo are a lot better. So in terms of overall screen experience and resolution and clarity, all those factors considered, the Oppo R5 has the superior display. Now, under the hoods of these two thin and light smartphones, we find a pretty different different configuration in terms of internal architecture. We're using the Apple A8 dual-core processor on the iPhone 6, which has 1 gigabyte of RAM, and we're using actually 2 quad-core CPUs, one clocked at about 1 gigahertz, the other one clocked at about 1.5 gigahertz, making an octa-core CPU when you combine them too. Now, in terms of overall performance in real-world tests, they're pretty much on par with each other, but taking a look at some specific benchmarks such as Geekbench 3, we definitely find that the Apple A8 is a real monster of a CPU. Even though it's dual-core processor, the Oppo R5 technically has a lot more threads to deal with, so in terms of multi-thread applications, you're definitely going to find comparable overall performance. But taking a look at the Geekbench score, you can definitely see that both in terms of single-core and multi-threaded applications, you are going to notice faster speeds on the Apple A8 on the iPhone 6. And the same kind of trend is followed up by our Antutu benchmarking score, where the iPhone 6 is pretty much a lot more powerful in terms of overall CPU and GPU performance. Now, the GPU on the Oppo R5 is the Adreno 405 GPU, which is definitely good in terms of delivering a good, consistent gameplay on especially higher-end, more graphically intensive Android games. I didn't experience any lag, any frame rate drops, or anything like that, so pretty good gaming experience on the Oppo. And even though the iPhone 6 is a higher performing device, I don't really find any complaints about the technical specification on the Oppo. Now, taking a look at some of the unique aspects about each phone, we definitely have to consider that the Apple iPhone 6 is probably one of the most easiest smartphones to get into if you're kind of new to the smartphone world. Additionally, iOS 8 is a great, very intuitive operating system that is really world and industry leading in terms of its ease of use and its overall kind of capabilities. But when we take a look at the Color OS skin that's running on top of Android on the Oppo R5, I definitely have to give it to Oppo for designing a pretty easy to use and pleasant looking skin that goes on top of Android 4.4. And I do have to say that there's a lot of different customization options, and you can even make it look like stock Android thanks to the different options for the themes. You can also buy different themes and pretty much customize the look of the phone based on your taste and preference. And one of the highlight features that I do love about Color OS is some of its gesture controls. Now, there's a lot of Android phones that have a lot of different gesture controls, but I think this one has a great execution of that whole notion. There's a lot of on-screen gesture controls, so you can kind of pinch outwards and open up the camera no matter where you are in the phone. You can basically slide a couple of fingers up and down to take a screenshot real fast. There's also a one-hand operation mode that you can execute pretty easily. And furthermore, there's even a lot of gestures when the screen is actually off in standby mode. You can double tap it to wake it up, which is kind of a feature that a lot of phones have, but it goes far beyond that. You can draw a circle like you can in some of the signage and mods to basically open up the camera. And probably my favorite feature is that you can add your own gestures, whether they be executed when the screen is on or off. One of the things that I've added is an actual V-shaped gesture when the phone is off, so that basically turns on my flashlight or my LED flash that's on the back of the actual phone, which is definitely a handy feature, something that the Cyanogen mod phone comes with, the OnePlus One, and you can go way beyond that. So tons of customization options on the Color OS. Now let's move on and talk about the cameras on these two devices. Now, in terms of the front-facing camera, we have 5 megapixel stills capabilities on the Oppo versus about 1.2 megapixel stills capability on the iPhone. So definitely better camera on the front-facing camera side on the Oppo. But in terms of the rear-facing cameras, we have 13 megapixels on the Oppo and about 8 megapixels on the iPhone. And in terms of the video capabilities, we have a max resolution and frame rate of 1080p at 60 frames per second on both phones. But in terms of slow motion mode, we do definitely have better slow motion capabilities on the iPhone with 720p resolution at 240 frames per second versus 720p at 120 frames per second on the Oppo. And taking a look at the stills side by side, you can definitely notice that they're pretty much on par with each other. At most times, they're both very quick in terms of taking pictures. The autofocus system is very fast, but the phase detection autofocusing on the iPhone is a bit quicker, so at times it does manage to keep your image a little bit sharper because it focuses that much quicker. But it's not really slow on the Oppo R5. But once you get it in focus, and both phones do a great job of rendering out pretty clear looking images, and in terms of resolution, since we do have more pixels to deal with in Oppo, we do definitely find a tad bit better sharpness. But in terms of color rendition and low light performance, I do have to give it to the iPhone. In most circumstances, it looks a little bit more balanced and a little bit more neutral, although the color rendition is not bad on the Oppo. And one of the great things about the phone is that there are absolutely a ton of different camera features and a ton of different camera applications. So you can actually turn this 13 megapixel stills camera into a 50 megapixel stills camera by some clever software tricks. It's still not a real 50 megapixels because you can only get so much out of the sensor, but it does give you a little bit more pixels to play with in terms of editing. And speaking of editing, you can actually shoot images in full raw DNG format, so you can basically change the white balance, the ISO settings, all after. So if you're kind of a photo nerd and a photography geek, that's kind of a fun feature too. And there's a whole bunch of different aspects about the different applications and the camera capabilities on the Oppo R5, which goes way beyond the options you have on the iPhone 6. Now moving on, in terms of video capabilities, as we mentioned before, both of these cameras are rated for 1080p at 60 frames per second, and they both do a good job of delivering video. Again, I do find a little bit better low light performance on the iPhone with overall better color rendition, but overall in terms of clarity and sharpness, I think they're pretty much on par with each other, with the exception that the iPhone 6 can do a slow motion mode at 240 frames per second versus 120 frames per second on the Oppo, which is certainly not as fast and as cool looking as some of the results you can get on the iPhone. Now, the very last thing that we're going to talk about is the battery performance out of these two smartphones. Now, in terms of actual battery size, they're looking pretty similar in terms of configuration, about 2,000 milliamp hours on the Oppo and about 1810 milliamp hours on the iPhone. They're both non-user replaceable, so you're pretty much going to have to send them to the manufacturer if you want a replacement out of the battery. But in terms of overall battery performance, based on my personal usage of both these two smartphones, I found that the iPhone 6 is just a tiny bit better in terms of getting me throughout the day without any issues at all. Now, since the Oppo R5 is so thin, we only have room for a certain size of battery, which is certainly a compromise. And even though it has organic LED technology, which is going to certainly help save you as much battery life as possible, because it can actually turn off regions that don't need to be on, which is definitely more power efficient than a traditional LED display that we find on the iPhone 6. But since it is still 5.2 inches, and if you crank up that screen brightness, it is going to eat away your battery percentages pretty quickly, and you'll have a hard time getting throughout the day. So you definitely want to be conservative with the brightness, want to use it at its power saving modes as much as possible, even though it kind of bogs down the overall performance of it. But if you're a power user, perhaps this isn't really the phone for you, and you might be more interested in a larger phone that has a bigger battery with more options. And even after breaking in the battery with multiple charges and discharges, I still found myself struggling to get through a 12 to 14 hour day without pretty much going into the 0% mark at the end of the day. So you definitely want to be careful on how you use the device, because compared to other modern day smartphones that can last between a day and a half to 2 days, it's certainly not as high as performing as some of the contemporary smartphones that are out there in terms of battery life. But other than that, I would love to hear your thoughts on the Oppo R5 and how it compares against the phones that you guys are currently using. Love to hear all your thoughts in the comments down below, and make sure to give us a thumbs up if you like this video, and check out our channel for all of the latest reviews and comparisons. We also have a couple of other comparisons with the Oppo R5. Might as well compare it against the Note 4 and the Apple iPhone 6 Plus, which is more towards its kind of size and configuration. But this was a real interesting comparison in terms of looking at the two most thinnest and compact smartphones that you can get out there. So again, subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and thanks so much for your support. We'll see you later. Take care.